welcome to the Benson Report. This week I'm going to be discussing a little bit about the state of our media and just trying to explain some of the recent legislation that got us into a position where we should be questioning our media and just seeing if we can identify some of the people at fault and what the goals were and what the result was. So I'm going to be focusing on what's called the National Defense Authorization Act. This isn't something that's widely discussed because, it's legislation that enables us to fund our military. So people don't question it, and by and large we shouldn't, because a lot of it is absolutely mission critical funding, and it allows our military to stay safe and do what they need to do around the world as well as here in America. But the National Defense Authorization Act has also been used as kind of a summary vote for stuff that wouldn't otherwise pass on its own. Stuff that is controversial is just kind of thrown in there. And so my focus tonight is going to be on the fiscal year 2017 National Defense Authorization Act. Before anybody starts accusing me of hating Republicans or hating Democrats, trust me when I say both sides played a role in this, and both sides need to be questioned as to what their motives were. So, the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act was signed into law by President Obama. It was one of the last things he did before he left office. Again, there aren't a lot of choices here. He essentially has to sign that law because our military has to be funded. I really put this more on Congress, on the Senate, on the people that actually draft and compile these bills. And at the time, that was mostly Republican, but I think we had a Democratic majority Senate at the time. I actually don't recall. But it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, it was Democratic president who signed it. And since then, we've had a Republican president who hasn't called it into question and hasn't raised concerns about the contents of it. And believe me, both of them should. So, if you go to page 548 of 970, yeah, the National Defense Authorization Act has 970 pages. That by itself is a problem. But on page 548, we begin what was called the Countering Foreign Disinformation and Propaganda Act. And it was something that, again, could have been voted on separately, but everybody kind of understood there's no way that would have passed by itself. So, it was thrown into the NDAA, and, well, of course it's going to pass then. One of the most disturbing passages from this particular act, and again, this is on page 548 of 970 in the NDAA. You can all download the NDAA, it's public record, and it's not actually that large of a file. It's PDF format, so we're talking like 6 megs. Not a big deal. Go ahead and download it. But the most disturbing passage, in my opinion, is the analyze relevant information, data analysis, and analytics from United States government agencies, United States allies and partner nations, think tanks, academic institutions, civil society groups, and other non-government organizations. As needed, support the development and dissemination of fact-based narratives and analysis to counter propaganda and disinformation directed at the United States and the United States allies and partner nations. Let me translate that for you. That essentially says the United States government is hereby authorized to create propaganda. Now, that's something we said we'd never do in this country. That's the First Amendment. Freedom of press. Our press isn't supposed to answer to the government. And this particular piece of legislation, and I just read one passage out of it, that actually goes on for a couple pages, and it's pretty specific as to what their scope is. And it's dangerous. It's phenomenally dangerous. We've given the government the power to shape narratives. That's exactly what propaganda is. And as much as we're focusing on fake news right now, the fact that this hasn't been called into question is, well, baffling. But then I guess it kind of isn't as well, because this piece of legislation was aimed at countries like China and, well, Russia. And so if Donald Trump were to question this particular piece of legislation, I mean, well, that's all the more ammunition for his opponents to say, oh, this guy is clearly okay with foreign operations in our media and with our news. And so maybe that's part of the explanation as to why he hasn't called it out. I don't know. But somebody needs to call it out. And we've had a couple politicians raise some concerns about it, but how it isn't a bigger deal is shocking, frankly. This is the kind of structure that the USSR used during the Cold War to peddle propaganda to their people. And oddly enough, the nickname used within the NDAA for this oversight body is called the Center, which is also who shaped the propaganda for the USSR. They called it the Center. Coincidence? I don't know. Maybe. I don't think so, though. Thanks for listening. This has been the Benson Report. Have a great weekend.